Tell us your diagnosis of the problem and your actual solution.
Yeah. So what I argue, well, I don't necessarily, I sidestep this question about whether wokeness is a problem, because I think that just depends whether you think of it as a problem or not.
We're just talking empirically about
Yeah,
why
yeah.
it happened, and how it sustains itself,
Yeah.
and how we could possibly change that. So that's what we're asking.
So what I show is that since this period after 2010 is a case of something, and we can identify these other ones using the same kinds of measures, right? That lets us compare and contrast to get leverage on questions like, why do they come about? Why do they end? Do they change things, etc.? So why do they come about? I argue that there's kind of two factors that are important. One of them is that awakenings tend to happen during periods of elite overproduction. So this is a concept that I borrowed from Peter Turchin and Jack Goldsmith. And the basic idea is when society is producing more people who have a reasonable expectation to be elites, then we have the capability to actually give them the lives that they're expecting and kind of counting on. When we're producing more and more of these people who envision these elite lives and are not living these elite lives, that's elite overproduction. And what they typically do when this happens is these frustrated would-be elites often turn their humiliation and grief towards indicting the prevailing order, indicting the institutions that failed them, the society that failed them, the system that failed them, and so on. And in fact, this goes back. This is something that goes back. I include quotes from the 1920s awakening that include students directly saying things like this: educated for jobs that will not materialize, will use our training to tear down to tear down the order that failed us. Like, they just say it outright in the 1920s. They beat Turchin and Goldsmith.
And most of these people are actually quite successful. They're in the higher zones. They're overwhelmingly white,
and they live. They're not living the elite lives they wanted, but they're not usually poor either. They're not on the streets begging or something like that.
So it's a way in which they can exercise their power over others and win power and demote others. In other words, it's a classic careerist move.
Yeah. And so that's the main thing the awakening is it's these kind of frustrated elite aspirants trying to clear out space at the top, replace the people who are successful or who are calling the shots with people like themselves instead. But the problem is elite overproduction itself can't predict awakenings, because as my advisor Seamus Khan showed and others, like the fortunes of elites and non-elites kind of operate counter-cyclically. So oftentimes that are good for elites are kind of bad for everyone else. And on the flip side, times that are kind of lean for elites tend to be pretty decent times for everyone else. And so it's hard, a lot of times when elites find themselves in a tough spot, it's hard to get anyone to care. No one's breaking out their tiny violin to like play a dirge for the poor elite aspirant who has to work a normal job and live a normal life. Boo hoo hoo. And so in many periods of elite overproduction, they don't generate awakenings, in part because it's hard to get anyone else to care about rich people problems. So why do awakenings happen? They happen during periods when the trajectories for elites and non-elites kind of collapse together, when things have been kind of bad and growing worse for ordinary people for a while, and all of a sudden they're bad for a lot of elites too. Those are the moments when awakenings happen, because these frustrated elites, then they have a lot of other people in society who are also pissed off, who are also angry at the ruling elites, who also want some kind of big change, who are also frustrated with what's going on in society. And so they have this kind of bigger mass of people that they can try to leverage in the service of their power struggles. And so those are the two predictors, the two core predictors that I identify in the book for when an awakening is likely to happen. And they tend to fade out for three reasons, basically. One, a decent number of elites over the course of the awakening. Institutions often respond by trying to find ways to at least fold some of these folks into the power structure. And once they get folded in, then they also have an interest in affirming the status quo and making sure the institutions they're part of don't burn down. And so they often kind of disengage or even start working on the side of the establishment. Meanwhile, the alliances that elites try to make with normies to kind of conduct these campaigns, they're often unstable because symbolic capitalists are like bizarre people. Like we think and approach politics in weird ways compared to most other people. At the end of the day, we have different interests than them. Like what we want to do is be elites more than anything else. That's what we want. And so eventually this leads to kind of conflicts and infighting, and these alliances prove unstable and kind of fall apart. And then as a result of those two things happening, the elites who don't get good jobs or find some way up eventually just have to give up because they don't have the ability to really keep the insurgency going anymore. So they just eventually have to resign themselves to living different lives than the ones that they imagined, at least until the next chance to engage in an awakening.